Lily sat quietly in the small, dusty room of the cottage where she had lived for as long as she could remember. The sunlight would occasionally drift through the small window, but her world remained dark. Her eyes were sightless. Her blindness had always been a burden, especially under the care of her stepmother, who never missed an opportunity to remind her of her worthlessness. Lily had been abandoned by her birth mother, and her stepmother had taken her in out of obligation, treating her more like a servant than a daughter. Today, though, something was different. Her stepmother entered the room with a cold, calculating look in her eyes. "I've made arrangements, Lily," she said, her voice harsh. "You're going to be sold. A wealthy man is looking for someone just like you, someone who needs to be kept out of the way." Lily's heart sank. "Sold? But, but where will I go?" Her voice trembled. Her stepmother's lips curled into a cold smile. "It doesn't matter. You're no longer my concern." Lily felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't dare protest. The stepmother dragged her to the market in the early evening, where a dark-haired, sharply dressed man awaited. Mr. Donovan. He stood tall and imposing, his features obscured by the brim of his black hat, his posture exuding both power and mystery. "She's yours," her stepmother said, pushing Lily toward him. Lily felt a pang of fear, her fingers trembling as they brushed against Mr. Donovan's gloved hand. He didn't speak much, but his intense gaze lingered on her. What had she gotten herself into? As the night air grew colder, Lily's heart beat faster. She was led to a grand, imposing carriage where Mr. Donovan's assistant opened the door for her. There was no time to question what was happening. Her future had already been sealed. Inside the carriage, she felt the plush velvet seat beneath her, but it offered no comfort. The silence between her and Mr. Donovan was thick. His presence was overwhelming, and yet his distance was palpable. She wondered what he expected of her. Was she to be his servant? His companion? Or was she just another possession to be tucked away in his vast mansion? The wheels of the carriage creaked and groaned as they rolled through dark, narrow streets. Every turn seemed to deepen the mystery of her fate. Her thoughts swirled in confusion. She had been sold like an object, and now she was being taken into the unknown. As they arrived at the mansion, Lily could hear the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of water trickling in the estate's expansive gardens. The mansion loomed ahead, its towering silhouette dark against the night sky. She felt the ground beneath her feet shift as she was led up the steps. "You'll be well taken care of here," Mr. Donovan's voice broke through the stillness, though it lacked warmth. "No one will harm you." But his words didn't comfort her. The mansion was far more intimidating than the cottage she'd left behind. The vastness of it made her feel small, insignificant, and alone. Inside the mansion, Lily was given a small, simple room. She sat on the edge of the bed, touching the cool silk sheets beneath her fingers. There was a softness in the space, but it only reminded her of her isolation. She longed for warmth, for something more than the sterile luxury surrounding her. The door creaked open, and Mr. Donovan entered, his presence towering over her. "You'll find everything you need here," he said, though his tone was distant. "Food, shelter, and all the luxuries you could ever want." Lily nodded silently, not sure what else to say. She wanted to ask him what his intentions were, but the words felt trapped inside her throat. He was a stranger, and in this mansion, she was a mere guest. A guest who had been bought. Over the next few days, Lily grew accustomed to the mansion's grandeur. She spent her time exploring the estate, though her movements were cautious, her steps slow. The house was filled with long hallways, spiral staircases, and high ceilings that made everything feel cavernous. The only comfort she found was in the massive library, where she spent hours running her fingers along the spines of old books, wishing she could read again. But her blindness was a barrier, one she could never overcome. One evening, as Lily wandered through the mansion, she heard Mr. Donovan's voice call out to her from the library. "Lily, come here," he said softly. She hesitated for a moment before slowly making her way toward him. She didn't know why, but there was something in his voice that made her want to see him, not physically, but emotionally. When she entered, he was sitting by the fireplace, the flickering light casting shadows over his chiseled features. He looked different in the soft glow, less intimidating, more human. He gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, but then sat down across from him. "I know this is all overwhelming," he began, "but I want you to know that you're not here just to be a servant. I need someone. Someone who understands." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm not just a millionaire. I'm a man who's lost a lot. A man who needs companionship." Lily could hear the vulnerability in his voice, something she hadn't expected. His words stirred something deep inside her. Could it be that he was not so different from her after all? She wasn't just an object to be owned. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a place in his world. In the days that followed, Lily and Mr. Donovan found themselves in deeper conversations. She began to understand him in ways she hadn't expected. He shared stories of his late wife, of the pain he'd endured, and of the loneliness he felt in this mansion. Lily, too, opened up. She told him of her struggles growing up blind, her fears of being abandoned, and her longing to feel seen. Their connection grew quietly, a slow and unspoken bond, but the tension between them was undeniable. It wasn't the tension of a master and servant, but something more, a pull, a strange magnetism. Lily felt it every time their hands brushed, every time their gazes met. One night, as they stood in front of the grand piano, Lily reached out and placed her fingers over the keys. The delicate sound filled the room, creating a moment of peace between them. Mr. Donovan stood silently beside her, watching with a soft expression on his face. The night felt different. More than anything, Lily realized that perhaps, just perhaps, her fate was about to change. One evening, Lily sat alone by the window, listening to the sounds of the mansion's garden. Her fingers traced the glass as she imagined the world outside. Mr. Donovan entered quietly, watching her from the doorway. He had been avoiding her ever since their deep conversation about their pasts. "Lily," he said softly, breaking the silence, "I've been keeping my distance from you." Lily turned to him, her face filled with confusion. "Why?" He sighed, his shoulders heavy with unspoken words. "Because the more I get to know you, the harder it becomes to remember why I wanted to keep you here in the first place. I've never felt this way about anyone." Lily's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, she saw the man behind the wealthy exterior, the man who had buried his emotions for so long. "You're not alone in this," she whispered, her voice gentle. "I understand." Their gazes locked in a shared moment of vulnerability. For the first time, the tension between them shifted. It was no longer about ownership, but about understanding. The following day, Mr. Donovan led Lily through the mansion's grand garden. It was a secluded haven, with vines draped across ancient stone walls and flowers in full bloom. The scent of roses and jasmine filled the air, and for a moment, Lily felt free from the heaviness of her new life. "You've never been outside much, have you?" Mr. Donovan asked, observing her reaction. Lily shook her head. I've never been able to see it, but it's beautiful, even without sight." He smiled, a soft and rare smile that made Lily's heart flutter. "The world is beautiful in more ways than one." They wandered through the garden, walking side by side, their conversation light but meaningful. For once, Lily didn't feel like a prisoner. With each passing moment, she felt herself drawn more to him, the mystery of his past slowly unraveling with every word. One evening, a storm rolled in, turning the skies dark and heavy. Lily had been reading in the library when Mr. Donovan appeared, an unusual gleam in his eyes. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated for a moment, but something in his expression urged her to trust him. Together, they went outside into the courtyard, where the rain had begun to fall in gentle sheets. "Why are we out here?" Lily asked, her voice tinged with wonder. Mr. Donovan led her to the center of the courtyard, where an old stone fountain stood. He looked down at her with a mix of tenderness and intensity. "I want to dance with you, Lily, under the stars, in the rain." He took her hand gently, and though she had never danced before, she allowed him to lead. The rain soaked through their clothes, but Lily couldn't help but smile. The world around her disappeared, and in that moment, all that existed was the rhythm of their shared movement. Lily's curiosity about the mansion grew with each passing day. One afternoon, while exploring the hidden corners of the estate, she stumbled upon a locked door deep in the mansion's east wing. Intrigued, she managed to find a way inside. The room beyond the door was a private library, filled with old books, letters, and portraits of Mr. Donovan's family. It was a space he had kept hidden away from the world. As she touched the old leather-bound books, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Mr. Donovan standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low but not angry. Lily felt a strange pull, a sense of shared intimacy in the space. "I was curious about your past," she admitted softly. "I want to understand you better." He stepped closer, his voice gentler now. "This room holds memories of a time I'd rather forget, but I suppose you deserve to know." For the first time, he began to share his past, the story of his late wife, and the tragedy that had led him to shut himself off from the world. Lily listened intently, her heart aching for him. Weeks passed, and the connection between Lily and Mr. Donovan deepened. They shared moments of tenderness, but neither dared to speak the words that hovered between them. It wasn't until one quiet evening, as they stood by the grand piano, that something changed. Lily was playing a soft melody, the music filling the air. Mr. Donovan stood behind her, watching her delicate hands move across the keys. Without warning, he reached out and gently touched her shoulder, causing her to pause. "Lily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to say this, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this." She turned to face him, her heart racing. "Feel what?" He closed the distance between them, his hand cupping her cheek as his lips brushed against hers. The kiss was gentle, but filled with a yearning that had been building between them for weeks. It was a kiss that spoke of shared pain, unspoken desire, and the hope for a future together. As the seasons gently shifted, so did the nature of Lily and Mr. Donovan's relationship. The coldness of winter had given way to the warmth of spring, and with it came a blossoming connection that neither had anticipated. Days passed by with shared laughter, long walks in the garden, and tender moments filled with understanding. It had become clear to both of them that their bond was no longer just about mutual companionship. It had evolved into something deeper. One late afternoon, with the golden light of the sun casting soft shadows on the earth, They found themselves sitting beneath the great oak tree that had stood for centuries, its gnarled branches stretching toward the sky. A gentle breeze swirled through the air, rustling the leaves and carrying the scent of fresh blossoms. Lily, with her face turned towards the warmth of the sun, rested her head against the rough bark of the tree. Mr. Donovan sat beside her, quietly observing her, as if trying to memorize every little detail about her: the way the sun lit up her hair, the peacefulness in her expression, and the gentleness of her presence. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Mr. Donovan said, his voice low and hesitant as he turned towards her. His hands, usually so confident and steady, were now nervously clasped in his lap. "After losing her, I thought I was done with love. But then you came into my life, and everything changed." Lily's heart skipped a beat as she looked at him, her fingers curling into the soft fabric of her dress. She had always known there was something hidden within him, an unhealed wound, a guarded heart. But she had never imagined that it would be this painful. She had never expected to see someone so successful, so confident in the world, reveal such vulnerability. "You've opened something inside me that I thought was lost forever," Mr. Donovan continued, his voice quivering just slightly. "You've brought light back into my life, and for that, I can't thank you enough." Lily reached out and gently placed her hand over his, her touch soft and reassuring. "I never thought I'd feel seen again," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But here, with you, I do." They sat in silence for a long moment, allowing the words to settle in the space between them. There was no need to say anything else. They both understood. The garden around them seemed to echo their newfound clarity, the flowers blooming in a riot of colors and the birds chirping from their nests. It was a perfect moment of peace, one that neither of them had ever imagined they would find. But now, it felt like home. The night sky was clear, its endless expanse filled with countless stars twinkling like diamonds. The air had grown cool, and the world around them was hushed in the serene quiet of evening. Mr. Donovan stood beside Lily on the balcony of the mansion, the glow of the moon casting a soft silver light over the two of them. Below, the garden was bathed in the same moonlight, creating a dreamy, ethereal atmosphere. Lily, standing beside him, could hear the soft rustle of leaves and the distant croak of frogs from the pond below. But her mind was focused solely on the man beside her, on the feeling in her chest that had only deepened over time, a feeling she had never thought would blossom into love. Mr. Donovan had become more than just the wealthy man who had taken her in. He had become her anchor, her solace, her heart's desire. With a soft sigh, Mr. Donovan turned to face her. His expression was serious, but there was a tenderness in his eyes that melted Lily's heart. He reached out for her hands, holding them gently but firmly, as if he were afraid that if he let go, she might slip away. His voice was steady, but there was an underlying emotion that trembled just below the surface. "Lily," he began, his tone rich with sincerity, "I never believed in love again after everything I've been through. But you've made me believe in it all over again. You've brought light back into my life in ways I never thought possible. And so, I'm asking you, with all my heart, will you stay with me forever?" Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, and her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she was frozen, not knowing how to respond. But in that moment of silence, she realized that the answer had always been clear. She had already given him her heart without even realizing it. And now, standing before him under the stars, she couldn't imagine a life without him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, I will. I will stay with you forever." As the words left her lips, Mr. Donovan's face lit up with a mixture of relief, joy, and utter adoration. He pulled her into his arms, his embrace warm and reassuring, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. The world around them seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them, intertwined under the endless expanse of the night sky. This was their moment, and nothing else mattered. The day of their wedding arrived, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers, soft music, and the sounds of laughter. It was an intimate ceremony, held in the heart of the mansion's garden. Only their closest friends and family were present, those who had supported them through the trials of their pasts. And now, here they were, standing on the cusp of a new beginning. Lily stood at the edge of the garden, her hands trembling as she gripped the delicate bouquet of flowers in her hands. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant gown that flowed softly to the ground, the ivory fabric catching the light of the sun. She had always imagined this moment, but never had she imagined it would be like this, so full of peace, so full of hope. As she walked down the aisle, she could feel the eyes of everyone on her, but she didn't care. All that mattered was the man waiting for her at the altar. Mr. Donovan stood with his back straight and his gaze fixed firmly on her, his heart thudding in his chest. For a moment, she was all he could see, his world, his future, his everything. When Lily reached him, she placed her hand in his, and as their fingers intertwined, a deep sense of belonging settled over her. This was it. This was where she belonged. This was home. The ceremony was short, but beautiful. Their vows were simple but filled with deep emotion, and when the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, Mr. Donovan pulled Lily into his arms, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that sealed their future together. The guests cheered, but for Lily and Mr. Donovan, the only sound that mattered was the steady beat of their hearts in sync with one another. After the wedding, life seemed to slow down in the most perfect way. Every day felt like a gift, as Lily and Mr. Donovan began their new life together. The mansion, once just a place of wealth and isolation, had become their home. It was filled with laughter, light, and love, a far cry from the loneliness that had once consumed it. They spent their days working side by side to restore the mansion, pouring their hearts into the place that would now be their sanctuary. Lily found purpose in managing the estate, her sharp mind and caring nature making her a perfect partner for Mr. Donovan. They were a team, and together they were unstoppable. With every task they completed, every conversation they shared, their bond grew stronger. There were moments of silence, moments of laughter, and moments of pure contentment. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had found their place in the world. As the days passed, Lily found herself more and more at ease with the life they were building. She was no longer the blind girl lost in a world of darkness. She was a woman full of hope and love, standing beside the man who had opened her heart to all the beauty the world had to offer. And in his eyes, she saw the same reflected back at her. Time passed, and the mansion transformed before their eyes, no longer just an estate of wealth, but a place where memories were made. The walls, once empty and cold, now held laughter, music, and the warmth of family. The gardens that surrounded the mansion bloomed with every color imaginable, a reflection of the love that had taken root between Lily and Mr. Donovan. On a quiet evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of pink and gold, and the air was calm, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Lily rested her head against Mr. Donovan's shoulder, her heart full of contentment. Together, they had built something beautiful, a life filled with love, understanding, and a future full of promise. Their journey had been one of healing, and now, with each passing day, they walked hand in hand into a future that was brighter than either had ever imagined. Their love had healed them both, and they had found a home in each other. As the sun finally set, casting the world in soft twilight, Lily whispered, "This is all I've ever wanted." Mr. Donovan kissed the top of her head, holding her close. "And it's all I'll ever need." And so, in that peaceful moment, their happily ever after began, full of endless possibilities, love, and the knowledge that together they could face anything the future had in store.